Welcome to Construction Genius. My guest, Melvin Newman of PataBid, back on the podcast. And this one is going to be awesome. You're going to really like this discussion. We're going to talk about risks that contractors face that they need to look out for with schedule, liquidated damages, and delivery. And Melvin really dives into the importance of identifying and quantifying those risks quickly and how you can do it. And then we kind of shift in the conversation in a very interesting way, and we talk about the topic of AI and its limitations. And Melvin is an expert when it comes to AI, having built his own AIs. You're going to really enjoy this. We're going to talk about the law of entropy. We're going to get into physics. We're going to get into intuition. We're going to talk about human nature. We're even going to get into 3D printing. Whoa! This episode goes all over the place, but it is extremely entertaining, extremely interesting, extremely insightful, and I know you're going to enjoy it. Let's dive right in. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Melvin, welcome back to Construction Genius.
Thank you very much, Eric.
Very happy to have you back. And I wanted to get you back on the show because there is a particular issue that I know you're an expert in that I want to explore, and that is the issue of risk. And so in today's market, what are the biggest challenges that contractors are facing when it comes to the risk aspects of the projects that they're looking at and working on?
It all comes back to that crunch time. So, I've mentioned it before when we've talked in the past. The vast majority of existential risk to a company, like your bankruptcy risk, happens in the first 100 pages of the specification and tender documents. And getting through that in the severe time crunch that we're having right now in the industry. So, their owners are putting out multi-million-dollar projects and giving 3 weeks maybe to bid on these. Mm-hmm. So you've got to read through, comprehend, and understand those risks, make that go, no-go decision on whether you're going to pursue the project. And then once you've pursued it, identify all the remaining risks, and then pull that into your estimate so that your company is secured. It's a huge problem that we have right now. And a lot of it comes back to how fast can you identify and quantify those risks?
Okay, so let's explore that then a little bit. Identifying, quantifying risks under a short period of time. What are the top risks that every contractor, give me let's say the top 3 to 5 risks that every contractor really has to look for in that first 100 pages?
The top 3 risks: schedule, schedule, schedule. It's like, that is just like I don't say that lightly. The schedule is always your number one risk. Does the owner want this job completed in 6 months and they've tendered it in August?
Right.
That means that you're working over the winter. Not a big deal as much. If it actually could be quite wonderful if you're down in Arizona. Yep. If you're in the northern states, if you're in, Colorado, or if you're, in the mountains, that's a massive showstopper. So the schedule is absolutely critical. Is the schedule achievable? And so that is the first and foremost risk. The second one that is tied back to it, and effectively all other risks are tied back to the schedule. The next one is like liquidated damages, or other owners call them incentives to complete. Yeah. They're really punishments for being late, whether it's in or out of your control. Yeah. So if they've given you that schedule window, and then they'll oftentimes put in something liquidative damages or schedule penalties, and they use all sorts of fancy words to bury it in there. Yeah. And that can be thousands of dollars a day. That is an existential risk to a company. Yep. Probably the third massive one on top of that, again, it's still schedule, is delivery. So since, 2020 and, all the fun and events that have happened around that, delivery has always been a challenge in construction, and especially delivery in, concrete's not too bad because we've gotten pretty good over the last few hundred years as the human race of making concrete. Right. But when you start to get into the complex controls, electrical, mechanical, delivery of those pieces can become a massive pressure on the schedule.
So I want to look at this from both a GC and a sub perspective then. And let's say I'm a GC, I'm looking at a project and I'm vetting my mechanicals in terms of my mechanical, my electrical, my controls, all of those that you just mentioned, in terms of, are they going to be able to handle this project? Are they going to be able to conduct themselves in such a way that they're minimizing the risk that are related to the delivery, to the liquidated damages, and to the schedule? How should I be approaching those trades and interacting with them to get more information and get more comfort level as far as that's concerned?
You're hitting a really interesting topic there. Owners have gotten really good at pre-qualifying because they've had many failed projects. GCs are starting to pick up on that. Like when you look at Kiewit, when you look at, Alberici, these big name GCs, they have started down this path of literally coming up with pre-qualified lists of sub-trades. And core on those lists are the complex trades. So your mechanical, electrical. And it doesn't matter what size. If you're just a residential home GC, if you're a massive high-rise tower or hospital institutional GC, you need to be pre-qualifying your trades.
Yeah. What are even some of the best GCs missing in that pre-qualification process that they really need to make sure they nail?
They need to be able to map the sub-trade to the project at hand. So you could have a sub-trade, like a mechanical or electrical sub-trade that you've worked with fantastically on, hospitals, on buildings, but then you go to do a high-rise. And this high-rise is like 50 stories. If you miss the fact that trade that you've got there, that mechanical or electrical, has never built anything over 10 stories, that's actually an existential risk to the project. Because that contractor, no matter how good they are working in the horizontal, if they have no experience working in the vertical, they're going to miss all of the risks around that. And those risks are fundamentally different. And you can bankrupt them. I literally watched it happen on a tower a few years ago here. It was a very well-reputed mechanical sub-trade. They had been around for, must have been like 50 plus years. They had tons of experience. It was the tallest tower built in the West here. It was 68 stories.
Right.
This mechanical trade had never built anything over 10 stories before.
Yeah.
They went bankrupt on the job.
So it's interesting, right? Because you would think that anyone with half a brain would ask that question, but sometimes it seems like we get a really good process in place that works for us, but we don't adapt the process as necessary based on the needs of the particular projects.
Yes, exactly. 100%. You're hitting the nail on the head there. If you don't map, and you really need to build like a Venn diagram as a GC. You need to build a Venn diagram of the type of project it is, the values of those projects, and then put all of your trades in there. And then as each project comes out, bring those circles together, and the trades that you want to qualify on that specific project are where all those things intersect.
Yes.
And yes, you may have a trade that may be not necessarily a perfect match for that project. Like if you're Kiewit doing dams, way out in the middle of nowhere, there's very few people who have actually done that before.
Right.
So once you've identified that, though, that mere thing that you can't qualify somebody for that becomes the risk, and you must mitigate that before that tender gets submitted. Okay. And that can be like major collaboration. At that point, your only way out of that is you need everyone in the room looking at this. And that's where things like joint ventures become a much more arguably viable thing on a project, so you can get that collaboration in.
Yep. Okay, so then I'm looking at that first 100 pages. What immediately pops into my head is AI, right?
Yep.
The problem with AI is that it's only as good as the prompts that it gets. The folks in construction, they may want to use it, but they may not be experts in prompting. And so they just keep it on the human side. At the place where we're in at the moment with AI, is it a viable option to help in this process of finding out what's in that first 100 pages? Or is it something where you're not quite there yet and you shouldn't really be looking at that?
It is 100% good for this thing. Like AI has a phenomenal amount of strengths and weaknesses. AI will never, in my personal opinion, this goes to a philosophy that I have.
Yeah.
I don't believe that AI can ever replace a human.
Right.
At the very best, it might get close to being equal to a human. But the reality is, I don't think that it's ever going to replace.
Why do you say that, though? Why do you say that?
This might sound a little bit weird, but straight up, I think that, the law of entropy, the second law of thermodynamics, basically precludes us from building something better than what we are.
Okay, explain that. Okay, so talk to me like a fifth grader. Explain to me exactly. No, I'm serious, because this is interesting, right? Explain to me why the law of entropy will prevent AI from ever acting like a human being.
Basically, what it comes back to is structures that are, man, you're asking a fantastic question of how to explain this. So entropy is sort of, in very simplistic terms, a measure of chaos.
Yes.
And you're trying to bring structure out of chaos.
Yes.
So when you're building an AI, you are bringing structure in where it didn't exist before. We, as a species, are the known pinnacle of structure in the universe right now.
Right.
Arguably, statistically, there might be other civilizations out there. I'm not going to get into that.
Right.
We are... All the evidence that we have in hand is we are the peak. I do not believe for a moment that we could build something better than us, because we can't bring more structure to something than we already are. And by the mere fact of us trying to build that, we are actually bringing more entropy into the system. And so these are barriers that physics actually puts in front of us.
Humans by nature, entropy is working in us by nature.
100%. It is a law of nature.
Yeah, it's a law of nature. Okay. Thus, there's an element of chaos in human beings, which maybe is that secret sauce to our humanity in a certain way. And a machine cannot replicate that sort of chaos / creative piece.
That is a whole nother thing. Like when you're dealing, everybody looks at ChatGPT.
Yeah.
And ChatGPT is probably one of the pinnacles of what we've achieved in AI, but it's still a mathematical formula.
Yes.
And what it is the most fantastic averaging engine. So ChatGPT will never call you.
Yes.
ChatGPT will never reach out to anyone. It physically cannot. It must take input to trigger that formula. We do not actually require that as a species. We do not require that input to start a train of thought that would lead to building ChatGPT. So again, ChatGPT, like we're up here, ChatGPT is still way, way down there compared to what our minds are capable of. So I think that at the very best, at the very peak we could achieve is something closer to us.
Right.
But I don't think that we could ever exceed what nature has actually developed in the human mind.
Okay.
So where it comes in, though, is AI is able to operate far faster than a human.
Yes.
And people mistake that for AI being smarter than a human.
Yeah. Okay. That's very good. Thank you for saying that. That's very good. So speed does not necessarily equal intelligence. It's
not at all.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Good. Go on.
Not at all. Just because it can read faster, just because the inputs and what's crazy is to make it read faster, the inputs have to be very specially coded.
Right.
And so you've hit the nail on the head too there. Like speed is not a measure of intelligence.
Well, let me ask you this though. Let's take it out of AI for a moment. Let's take it to one of those chess computers. Okay.
Yeah.
So a chess computer can beat a grandmaster at this point. Is that correct?
Not quite, actually.
Not quite.
So
Okay.
We've played this Bobby Fischer.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard of him.
Of course, I've heard of him.
What massively famous chess master.
Yeah.
He did a thing to prove that these computers are simply brute forcing. They're not actually thinking. He came up with what's called Chess 960. And my brother is an absolutely psychotically amazing chess player. He has been since he was a kid. And the only time I managed to beat him was the first time I introduced him to Chess 960.
Right.
He has since eclipsed me on it. Basically what it is, when you're laying out your chessboard, you put all the pawns in the regular spot, but then you take the white pieces from random out of a bag and put those along the back row and match that with the black pieces. And what it means, Chess 960, is there's 960 different permutations of that back row that you can have. That raises the complexity of the game far beyond current computers' ability to brute force it. Now, they have used some learning AI algorithms to significantly up the game at Chess 960, but it is still a point where humans are able to beat the computers.
Okay.
And I'm no longer able to beat my brother at it. It's very depressing.
Okay. So then now what's interesting too about chess is that though chess is incredibly complex, so basically when you're doing Chess 960, you're changing the game. The game is changed. Is that
The
right?
rules are identical. All you've done is increase the mathematical dimensions of the game.
Okay, so the dimensions have changed, but nevertheless, there's still a structure around that.
Yes.
And so the argument about AI not being able to replicate human beings is that the reality that we live in, it does have some of those dimensions that are unchangeable, such as laws of physics. However, the complexity that's within those dimensions is too great for a machine to be able to adapt to. Is that what we're saying?
I actually think that a machine can adapt to it, but it can't generate the thought to adapt.
Okay.
Humans can look at a problem and adjust themselves to the problem. We can actually change our train of thought. The computer can never think to start that process.
It needs another input in order to...
It does. It needs the push. Once it's there and once the quote unquote model is trained, it's great. But like ChatGPT will never look at the problem now and adjust its training. It can't. You know, they could put some fancy programming in to do that, but then again, you're just guiding it with your own intelligence. It's becoming a mirror of us, which is again why we can never get it to be greater than us. At its very best, it might be slightly faster than us.
Yes.
And things like emotion. Where does emotion come from?
Right.
And what does that do to our thoughts?
Yes.
Can AI ever replicate that? And
so that's interesting, right?
Yeah.
Because how do you machine or algorithm intuition, for instance?
Intuition is actually an interesting one because AI can actually replicate intuition very well.
Okay.
But it can't feel good or bad about that intuition. That's a thing. Like it can't get a gut feeling. Like the AIs that I've trained and worked with, one of them in particular, natural language processing model, built it back in 2016 to help with my job. It actually has a really unique intuition when it comes to identifying things in the projects it looks at. But it can't tell me if that gave it a good or bad feeling. Like when I look at it, I look at what it finds and I'm like, whoa. Yeah, no, that gives me a negative feeling. I'm not going to bid on that project. I got a bad gut feeling. It can never tell me that.
So are we saying then that what makes us uniquely human is not only our minds, but our emotions as well, and the combination of those two things together?
100%.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting question. Like, I mean, we're getting into kind of the...
It's fine. We're
off on a bit of a tangent here, but I love this tangent.
It's all good.
Because it does actually come back to everything we do in our day, but we do it subconsciously.
Yes.
We don't necessarily identify this. And this is why AI has some massive limitations when you try to actually apply it to something like construction. And a lot of it comes back to that quote unquote gut instinct.
Yeah.
And you can't really teach an AI to have a gut instinct. It can't actually have an instinct at all.
Yes.
It is still, even though it's a really fantastically amazing formula, like ChatGPT at its core is actually a formula.
Yes.
That formula is unexpressible in anything that we could actually understand because it's a formula that has built itself. It has adapted itself. But at the end, it is literally a formula. And so it requires an input to trigger the output of that formula.
Interesting.
That formula can't feel something that would lead to that thought. Like one of the things, like the greatest thing for human invention has been discomfort.
Yes.
You know, we looked outside and we said, wow, it's cold outside. I should build a hut.
Yep.
Wow, it's, getting dark outside. I should build a fire.
Yep.
And so we have that train of thought that an AI will never have.
Yes.
Because AIs can't feel uncomfortable.
I tell you, I'm having a great time with Melvin here today. This is a killer conversation. Quick break to remind you about my book, Construction Genius: Effective, Hands-On, Practical, Simple, No BS. Leadership, strategy, sales, and marketing advice for construction companies. If you're listening to this, you either run or own or work in a construction company, you've got to read this book. It is a killer book. It is full of practical tips that will transform the way that you lead, the way you strategize, the way you sell, the way you market your business. Go out to Amazon right now and purchase copies for you and your leadership team. You will not regret it. Now, let's get back to my conversation with Melvin. Let me ask you this then. Okay, so one of the things I think about then when it comes to human beings, because we were talking about this idea of input, right? And you could say that there's no more original thoughts in the sense that even the thought that I have in my mind, some sort of input has come into me in order to maybe provoke that thought. I might have an original idea that comes from the input, but that input is necessary. So let me ask you this. One of the great things to do as human beings, right, is to get together and collaborate, and that collaboration of, the two different inputs, my input with yours creates a new input. Is there a point where one AI model is going to be able to collaborate with another AI model, and through that collaboration, in one way or another, replicate or imitate what human beings do together?
So that already happens, actually.
Okay.
It's called a generative adversarial network, again, for short. It's actually what's largely used in, all the AIs where you can upload a picture and it can make it look like Van Gogh.
Yeah.
It can make it look like something else.
Yes.
So those are actually a class of AIs called generative adversarial networks. And you have one AI that is literally being trained to defraud the other AI, and the other AI is trying to identify the ground truth. And then they work together, and then they are all trained so that when you input a new raw image that it's never seen before,
right,
they actually work together to come out with the output that is as close to what you select. Like if you've trained it on Van Gogh,
sure,
it will generate a Van Gogh for you.
Yeah.
And one of the innovations that they've made lately is to strip out the training it on to replicate an image and instead take text in and generate the image.
Yes.
And that's what these GANs are really, really good at. They identify the so there's an NLP model in front of them, and then they feed in the images to both so that the NLP model fights with the image model to basically teach it when this text comes in, generate this kind of output.
Interesting.
And that's where a lot of the really fancy image creation, like where you give it a description, it builds an image. So we're really going backwards. We're now typing 1,000 words and getting the image rather than, it takes 1,000 words and out of the image. So
excellent.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating field right now. And my biggest concern in it is not that AI is going to take over, it's that people using the AI
will
be much faster at doing things for both good and, shall we say, not good.
But the interesting thing is that, and again, we'll pivot back here to construction, guys, but this is interesting. In a certain way, I guess it's like any tool like this, AI is actually making us dumber.
In some respects, 100% correct. It has that capability of replacing some of our thought process.
Yeah.
If we let it.
Yeah, if we let it, right? So if I'm a high school student, right, AI, for many high school students, is making them dumber, right?
It's killing the potential work ethic.
Yes.
Like you no longer have
But not just the work ethic. It's not the work ethic, but it's also the second and third level consequences of actually doing the work.
That's what I mean. Yeah. Like if you kill the work ethic, there's no more incentive to learn.
But that's the thing, is the learning process itself has a value to it. That's why, we go to school and we take these classes that we'll never remember again. But the fact that we take them has some sort of an impact on us and the way that our minds function.
You're totally correct in that respect. And that is a very concerning aspect of the application of AI.
Yeah.
Because of what we as a society are wildly barreling towards laziness.
Yes.
This is, again, a personal opinion.
No, it's fine.
I hope your audience doesn't take too much offense at this.
No one's going to take offense. This is great. If they do, they can just stop listening. It's fine.
It's straight up the way it's going. And AI is accelerating that.
Yeah.
Conversely, in fields of thought and thinking and where things are necessary, it is empowering the people.
Yes.
I think where we could be headed, where it would be really fascinating, is some of these massive AIs become our pets.
Yes.
You get, here's a really wild sci-fi future for you.
Sure.
Your child is born, and do you remember Tamagotchis? Do you ever remember?
No, I don't.
When I was a kid in school, they were all the rage, these little digital toy, pets that you could carry around with you.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Well, there's a future where that pet is assigned to the child, and it's an AI. And that child and that AI learn together. And they start to merge together in life. And so the AI becomes the memory. And then where it gets fascinating is as our brains age and we start to forget things and we start to struggle with, the complexities of life, the AI starts to become part of us.
Yes.
And it starts to take over some of these functions.
Yes.
So we're really moving, in my personal opinion, our species is moving far closer to being a cyborg. A merging of technology and who we are.
Right.
Every time you put your earbuds in and turn on your phone, you are actually the classical definition of a cyborg.
Yeah, and when people hear that, they may think that's kind of weird, but it's interesting, right?
It straight up is weird.
It is weird, but at the same time, if you think about it, you think about the way we function with technology. Technology has a tremendous impact on the way that we perceive life to begin with, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
VR. Like VR is fantastic. I've clocked people through my VR systems. I set up my own VR lab.
Right.
Within 5 minutes, with the headset on, the goggles on, and the controls, the human mind accepts what it sees as real life.
Yes.
And if you throw a pillow at that person while they're after about 5 or 6 minutes of being in that environment and they get hit by a pillow, it is fantastic, the psychological jar that it gives them when the brain suddenly remembers what it's seeing isn't real.
Mm.
And it gives you this crazy concept of the future and what it can enable for both good and bad.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Because technology can change the way we perceive reality.
Yeah. It's interesting. One very simple way of looking at it, you think about the technology of the airplane. You think about, I was thinking about this once. Just recently, I flew from California to New York, spent a day in New York with a client, and then flew back. And, people are like, Eric, so what? We do that all the time. But just think about this, right?
Yep.
That is, if you just go back 100 years, right?
That
would have been mind-blowing.
Yep.
Just mind-blowing.
Yep.
And that's just a regular technology we use all the time. And then we haven't even talked about the fact that we have these supercomputers in our hands and how those have completely rewired our brains just in the last 15 years.
The sum total knowledge of the human race is available at our fingertips.
Right.
Now you have to get through the pure lies.
Yes.
And such to make sure you get to the ground truth.
Yes.
But it's there. One of the other fascinating things is I've seen my first virtual presence device in a company where somebody can log in and attend a meeting. It literally will drive around the office with a screen on it that shows them.
Yes.
And they can actually drive it around the office from anywhere in the world.
Yep.
And this thing looks insanely clunky. It's on wheels and I don't think it's actually being used at the company. When I saw it, it was turned off, but I'm like, that is an interesting future.
Yep.
We no longer have to fly to New York. We humanize those a little more. We find a way through the uncanny valley.
Right.
And suddenly you can attend a board meeting anywhere in the world.
And so that's the thing, right? Because you think about, again, going back to this thing used to fill, 3, 4, 5 rooms. I mean, whatever it was, the computer that drives this was massive and it no longer is, right?
Yep. I see a very unique future.
Mm.
And some of the first 3D printed houses are going on the market now.
Right.
There's another one for risk mitigation.
Yes.
We go back to that. You move to 3D printing on a building size scale, especially if you're going vertical.
Right.
If you build that 3D printer so that thing can go vertical, you've cut your safety risk down to 1/10. Where it's fascinating is, we could get into the whole argument of, okay, what happens to the jobs? Well, I think the jobs will shift to the guys who are now working on the ground maintaining this printer.
Sure. So that's an interest. Let me just ask you about that, right?
Yeah.
Because when you say 3D printing, right? 3D printing has been floating around construction and people have been trying it and thinking about it for years and years and years, right?
Yep.
When is something like that going to actually be viable on the unique projects that we're building because that's the thing about construction, right? Every project is ultimately unique because it's geographically located, right? And when does that happen?
You see, that's where I would say that 3D printing is actually far more applicable to construction than people actually perceive right now because of exactly what you said. Construction, everything we build is a prototype.
Right.
3D printers philosophically are only built to build prototypes.
Right.
They are literally at the ground up designed to solve the problem of construction.
Uh-huh.
Now, the fundamental challenge we have in this is that the limitation we have right now is construction is comprised of thousands of different material types.
Right.
And 3D printers haven't reached that level yet of being able to, they can work in multiple materials right now, but they're very slow at that.
Yes.
And how do you certify, can you imagine, so 3D printer, you are now building your concrete building, and instead of running cables, it switches over to 3D printing in copper or some other conductive material. And it literally embeds that into the concrete as it's going up. And then all the electrician has to do is come back in and tie in the device into those already running conductors in the wall. And so it becomes a fire and forget kind of thing.
Yeah.
Now, piping is a whole different situation.
Yes.
How do you put something like water through this? But that's things that can be overcome.
Yes.
Like we can 3D print like this. I don't know. Right here is my 3D printer on my desk.
Yeah.
And it's about to be replaced by a much newer model from Prusa that can print in multiple materials.
And what are you using that for?
I use that for everything from rocket design to 3D printing parts for kids. My daughter has started selling 3D printed toys at her school. And
I know those customized toys like to people's particular needs.
Exactly. Yes. They want to tweak something. Perfect. You want different colors for your individual copy of this toy. Boom. It takes like 30 seconds. So now you want to do a high-rise building, a 60-story building, and you want to warp that core and twist it so that it's coming up as this like wicked spiral that like defies wind flying at it. It self-cancels the air turbulence as it's twisting. That's something that's almost impossible to construct without 3D printing. And so when we get that point right now, like we can do it in concrete is a fantastic material.
Yep.
Because that's what the vast majority of 3D printed buildings are working with right now.
Yes.
Is in the concrete.
Yeah.
Well, now in most of the 3D printers that are out there right now, they're targeting disaster relief.
Okay.
So Hurricane Katrina 2 comes rolling through. Well, these guys come back in and they lay down 2 rails on a flattened city block. They take a bulldozer, they clear the block. They lay down 2 rails and they literally hit print and just keep filling the thing with concrete.
Yep.
And it will print house after house after house. And they're about 800 square feet. They're not enough to be, grow up in per se. But I mean, many people in World War II did.
Yep.
And
true,
earlier.
Huh? Yeah.
And those houses are actually still around today.
Yeah, they are. I remember seeing them in my hometown.
The first house that my parents bought was 800 square feet. And we spent years growing up in that.
Totally.
My brother and I.
Totally.
And it was not built by a 3D printer. It would have been far better if it was.
Yeah, right.
And so they can do this though. And in a matter of a couple of days, have like 10 houses built that people can get back into while we rebuild the whole area.
Yes.
And so that is the immediate use case for 3D printing. But now you take those rails and you put them vertical.
Right.
And now you can go up.
Yes.
And that is where, putting those rails up, as long as we design this thing properly so that it's faster than building the building itself,
right,
which is a limitation we have right now. We need to make these printers more modular, if you will. But then you fire that up and you can have the core of that building, because the printer's going to run 24/7. Or the other huge application of this, 3D printing dams. You put in your dikes, you redirect the river, you have the bed, you set the foundation, you can literally put the rails across the top of the canyon.
Yes.
And that printer head starts at the bottom and it just goes back and forth.
Right.
And it leaves openings for every room for the turbines. It leaves all of that in. And it will sit there and run 24 hours a day, printing that for you.
Okay. That was a sweet rabbit hole. We went.
I'm sorry, man.
No, dude. This is great. Because this is fun, right? We're having a good conversation. I love this.
It's where construction is headed, man.
Dude,
it's absolutely awesome.
It's awesome. Okay, so let's pivot back though. We started talking about the risk. We started talking about the schedule, and I just want to go back to that idea of the first 100 pages. Just walk me through exactly what every contractor, whether a sub or a GC, needs to be thinking about as they're going through that first 100 pages, and how is it that we can be more effective at that, and even what is it that your company does to help people with that?
Yeah, there's a famous thing, I can't remember which president it was, but maybe you can remind me, trust but verify.
Okay.
So when you approach any contract, any of these, even if you've worked with that owner for 100 years, that owner could have new people in there. There could be prejudices against you. So always verify. Start with a level of trust, especially if it's someone you've worked with, but verify.
Yes.
So open up those documents. And this is a key critical miss for the subtrades. They never actually look at the first 100 pages. They might look at the general conditions of their own section. So if you're in division Div 20s, mechanical and electrical, depending on which spec you're going with. But in the modern spec, it's Div 20s are mechanical and electrical.
Right.
And you might look at the general conditions in there. Or, if you're in the general trades, you're going to look at the general conditions for the front end of yours. But if you don't go right back to the beginning, because the schedule's never in that area of the spec,
Yep.
the liquidated damages are never mentioned there.
Yep.
They're always in that very front end. What you need to do as a general contractor, you need to always make sure that your subs read that too.
Right.
So, and this is a famous problem that the GCs will sometimes cut that out when they send out their RFQs to the sub trades, and they'll just send them the exact little piece to bid on. And some GCs do this nefariously because they think that it's going to get them a better price or they're helping.
Right.
Some GCs do this maybe out of ignorance. They don't really realize, but you need to ensure that everybody that's going to be bidding you as the GC fully appreciates that front end document and what's in it. So even if you don't send them the whole rest of the spec, you always send the tender forms, the front end, those first 100 pages, and then what you want them to bid on. And when you approach those pages, you need to approach them with a healthy amount of respect.
Yeah.
And look at this holistically. What is going to happen to my company if we win this job? It could be amazing, but it can also be devastating.
Yes.
What are the safety requirements? Because again, in the first 100 pages, that's where they'll write in things like you must have full-time on-site safety.
Yes.
And they might put in, most often, it's just the GC that has to provide that. So that's a risk to the GC. But they might flow that down.
Yep.
Because what can happen is those general conditions in your MEP spec or in your drywalling spec on a major project will bind you back to that front end. And if you haven't read that, you will miss the fact that that actually now says that every sub must have a full-time representative on there. And if you leave that out of your bid on a multi-year project, that can be $100,000, couple $100,000.
Yes.
To have your safety guy sit on site 24/7, maybe not 24, but at least 10 hours a day, they're going to be on that site sitting there while your people are working.
Yep.
And, you know, if it's a 2 or 3 year long project, that's $150,000 potentially once you put all the burdens and everything in. And that's a hit. On-site nursing, once you pass a certain number of crew on the site, when do you start having to provide on-site medical facilities? Again, when you're building ironic, when you're doing hospitals,
right?
Oftentimes you actually have to have on-site medical staff dedicated to the project.
Yes. Because
if somebody injures themselves, falls down the stairs or something on this, like they have to respond right away. And those sites are so big. Specialty, if you're in the mining sector,
right,
you have to have trained crews in extraction.
Yep.
Those are not cheap. And all of those risks are defined at the very front end.
Okay.
And you need to have a matrix.
Okay.
Every sub GC, the GCs are really good at this. Any sub trades listening, you need to go talk to your GCs and get their templates for the risk matrices and then apply them to every one of your jobs.
Okay.
And that will help you identify what these risks are and the costs associated with them.
Right.
So that you carry in your estimate.
It's really interesting because so many contractors are successful because of their intuition.
Yes. Yep.
But they can also be damaged tremendously by relying too heavily on that intuition. And that's where the trust but verify comes in.
Yes. And this is where AI, because it lacks that intuition, can really be a massive help to you. Because it will just pull out the mathematical cold hard facts
yes,
of what it sees. So you run, and this is actually one of the reasons why one of the AIs that I built that we're actually just bringing someone in to resurrect it and put it into one of the front ends of our platform. It literally would read those first 100 pages. That was all it was built to do.
Yes.
And it simply extracted the paragraphs that it identified as those risks.
Right.
So then I could, and it would do that in less than 30 seconds.
Yep.
I benchmarked it against one of my coworkers who spent 4 hours going through the documents one day. He came and asked me to reread them to see if I would find the same things. I just handed it over to the AI, picked up a cup of coffee, sat back down, and it was done. And it had pulled out everything he had found.
Interesting.
And he was so angry at me.
Interesting.
He's like, why did I waste 4 hours doing this? And I'm like, yep, that's the question. Because we were then able to then bring our intuition to it.
Right.
It brought the cold, hard facts out.
Yes.
This paragraph right here is prejudicial to your project.
Yes.
This one right here mentions liquidated damages. And then we're able to do this with and look at it a lot more cleanly.
Yes.
and say, okay, and that AI was explicitly built to assist in the go, no-go decision.
Yes.
You then take it away and read it for the stuff the AI doesn't understand.
Right.
But it will at least get you through. Instead of spending 4 hours to decide if you're going to bid something, it can be done in 40 seconds.
Okay. Give us a little bit more about your company and how people can get in touch with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are bringing that sort of AI into the places where AI applies and leaving it out of the places where it doesn't.
That's good.
The short answer. We are hyper focused on the front end of the business.
Yep.
So from sourcing the opportunity to work on through to that go, no-go decision point into the estimate itself. And so we've developed a number of AIs. Really, I've developed these AIs to help me when I was an estimator, and then we're commercializing them.
That's
and
awesome.
So they
I love that. I love it, dude. I love it. Solve your own problem first and then help other people solve it.
Well, it makes it so much better because it's like, okay, I've actually faced these problems. And I've been insanely privileged in my relatively short 15 years as an estimator to have worked in everything from nuclear. I've touched the core of the the NRU reactors in Chalk River, all the way into gold refining at the Mint, a whole bunch of these projects and those power dams. So you get to see how much risk there is and what they all look like.
Right.
So that's what we're teaching these AIs about. And they're not there to replace your intuition. They can't. But they're there to expose these things to you in the cold, hard truth.
Yes.
And then you make the call.
Yes.
So that is what they're there to do. They're there to accelerate the human. Our estimating platform that we produce, it has an AI built in there to do all the counting for you.
Yep.
Do a bunch of the counting for, not all of it. It does all, widget counting, that kind of stuff in there. But it's there to make you go faster.
Yep.
It's not there to replace your trade knowledge that, in Kansas City, they have a code requirement that, every electrical device must be grounded in a certain way.
Yep.
There's no way you can train an AI to know everything. No human can know every code requirement of every different area.
Yes.
And so all an AI can do is average that out, but you can't run with averages when you're actually working on something specific. So we accelerate the time suck of, the counts and those kind of pieces. And then the human is very much in the loop and controls the AI to do its bidding. So that's kind of what we're about.
Could you summarize it like this? Is what you're doing is you're providing the AI which can give you the cold, hard facts so that you can make better decisions.
Better decisions and faster decisions.
Okay.
And with less resources, because I'll be honest, especially like in the US right now, in America, estimators are not just a dying breed, they are a very endangered breed.
Yes.
Like estimators need to be front and center of the, World Wildlife Foundation of endangered species. It seems like there is just a huge hole in construction right now for qualified, viable estimators. And we're having to rebuild that right now. We are having to bring new estimators up from grassroots. And that's where these AIs can help because they bring those cold, hard facts that these untrained estimators may not be aware of.
Yes. Okay. So Melvin, tell us how we can get in touch with you, please.
Melvin at PataBid.com, Melvin at PATBAD.com. PataBid.com is our website.
Yep.
You can go there. You can sign up for trials and such for our platforms. Get in touch with us if you have kind of special, unique needs. That's what we really like to get involved in, is really helping people with this very tip of the spear of their business.
Excellent.
Reach out anytime.
Melvin, you've been tremendously helpful, and I've really enjoyed this conversation. I'd just like to say this to the audience. The thing that Melvin has, which is really important, is he's not just a tech guy coming from the outside, but he is a guy who's actually been in the business and worked as an estimator. And so he brings that kind of experience plus the technical proficiency, and you combine those two things together and you have something really pretty cool. So it's something well worth checking out. So I encourage you to go to that website, patabid.com, and learn more about the work that they're doing. Melvin, thank you so much for coming on the show here today.
If I can throw one more thing in there, Eric,
please throw it
any
in.
Of your, student audiences, if you're, young in school looking at something, especially if you're in tech, construction, the front end, estimating is probably the best career choice you can make right now, speaking fully biasedly.
That's great. I appreciate you saying that, and I think that's something to really keep in mind. So thank you very much for coming on here today, and
Absolutely, Eric. Always a pleasure.
Awesome, thank you. That was a 5-star interview. This is what I'd like you to do. Please go out to wherever you get your podcasts. You're listening to this on the app right now. Hit the 5-star if you think we earned that 5-star rating, and then write a short review of why you love Construction Genius and why people should listen to this show. I'd really appreciate it if you could do that. And thank you for listening. I'm going to catch you on the next episode.